Your life is too short to be wasted working for a bad manager. If you try to do the right things and your manager won't change, get the hell out. That's like, even though I like to retain my people, if working for me is living hell for you, leave. All right, let's do this. Hey, everybody. Good evening. It is showtime, and tonight I want to talk about how different leaders. We now have the evidence to talk about how many different leadership styles and cultures have demonstrated their strengths and weaknesses in the COVID pandemic. So I said months ago that this would be a leadership clinic. And whenever I talk about leadership, a few of you are like, well, I'm not a leader. Why should I care? What's the difference? We're all leaders in some way. And even if you never want to be a leader and you think you're not a leader, understanding the leadership that you're getting from others is super valuable, because either you can be totally surprised. I'm going to have to sit down for this. Either you can be totally surprised by what the leaders are doing and asking you to do, or you can anticipate and understand, which will make your life a lot easier. So whether you want to be a leader or you want to just chill out and be a follower who doesn't feel jerked around in the wind, this is your chance. And I said 2-3 months ago that COVID was going to be a perfect leadership lab, and here's why. Every manager, every company CEO, every mayor, every representative in whatever type government, every dictator, every president, premier, prime minister, God emperor, they were all given the same leadership challenge at roughly the same time. And so for once, we have a comparative study in a real world laboratory on a global basis, across cultures, across countries, across boundaries. Now, what have we learned from that? Because we're 3 months in. Now, it's not over. And there will be books being written on the leadership decisions made in each country for decades. But a ton was learned. And I want to talk about it. So first, let me go back and just show a little bit of data. We're going to end up talking about this. I think I showed it last week, but it's so much more dramatic this week. This is the European Union and the U.S. have roughly the same population, and this is their rolling 7-day average of newly confirmed COVID cases. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see there's a difference, and that the difference is changing sharply. So I will say as an aside, and I will come back to this, I've always been very proud to be an American. Doesn't mean I am blind to the fact that Americans can be abrasive jerks in certain contexts, but generally America's been like standing up for democracy and freedom and free speech. We're pretty good. Like overall, since World War II, in World War II, and since World War II, we've been pretty positive. This is not our finest hour. This is terrible. And it's humiliating. So that's good. A good dose of humble pie is always a good breakfast. So I'll drink to that. I'm having my humble pie and my margarita to wash it down. I'm drowning my sorrows at America's poor handling. So we're going to talk about why America has screwed this up so badly. But we're also going to talk about why the EU has seen success, as well as we'll talk about, to the limit I know, China, Sweden, some other cultures. And remember, this is an important place for me to say, anytime I talk about a given culture or a given country, I am generalizing. I cannot, there are going to be people, there are people in America, for sure, who disagree with the way we've handled the pandemic. There are people in Sweden who disagree with how Sweden has handled it. And no doubt people in China, in South Korea, in Taiwan, and on and on and on. But you can still make generalizations about how the country and the populace have reacted. And one of the lessons I learned in this that's important A leader's ability to lead is constrained or enabled by what the culture will tolerate. And we're going to talk a lot about that because, yes, a leader can sway a culture, but if you've spent decades establishing one culture, it's very, very hard to pivot to another. And we're going to talk about that in terms of entrepreneurship when we get there. So, great. So there's that graph. Here's today's bad news. This is the U.S. by state, but the fun number here, let me see. I'll see if I can refresh this real quick. It's rolled over, so I have to go to yesterday because at 6 o'clock local time, it rolls over. So the U.S. ended, according to this data, which is on Worldometers, at 46,000 cases. Wow, look at that. Second Life. Got to make sure that's borderline something you wouldn't want on Twitch. Luckily, it's an ad. Anyway. Okay. So we've covered this. Let's talk. So I have my notes on this. What do I want to say? Well, here's the first thing. I'm going to talk about why America has screwed this up so badly, but what that tells you about leadership. And I thought about this a lot, so pay attention, please. What we've got wrong in America, you might think, oh, blame it on Trump, whether you're American or not, whether you're pro-Trump or not. A lot of people lay this at Trump's door and they say it's a leadership problem. Well, kind of. It's also a culture problem. And so what we've misunderstood, and I talked some about this in my last rant, what we've misunderstood in America is that something being inconvenient or unpleasant means that it violates your rights. That's what people seem to believe. So, well, I want to go to a bar. Well, bars are dangerous right now. You can't go. What? You're violating my rights. You need to wear a mask in order to get on an airplane. No, I don't. I don't like masks. They make my face itch. You're violating my rights. No. America, this is a story I tell. I'm going to transition for a moment and come back. In most sports, everyone is familiar with the idea of home field advantage. So teams tend to do better, whether they're playing American football or soccer or baseball or whatever. They do better on their home field in front of their home fans. War, it turns out, is the one sport you really want to play on the away field. You want to play war not on the home field. Well, in World War II, America got to play the game of war on a global basis, not on our home field. The result was we came out of World War II much better off than much of the rest of the world, which hosted. This is not a good sport to host. So, America since then has basically had very good times. Yes, there have been different subgroups in America that have had bad times, and there have been recessions, but America has had good times. The challenge here is we've become spoiled. We haven't had any hard times, and apparently now for many Americans, from things being relatively easy and safe, no wars, generally good economies, and it doesn't mean everyone, we've gotten to the point where anything that inconveniences us is intolerable. And that is basically spoiled toddlerism, where being asked to put on a mask, which, yeah, there's like one fraction of 1% who for some medical reason can't wear a mask. It's a tiny amount. For everybody else, it's a choice, and they're rebelling against it basically out of spoiled toddlerism. So the point is, people here like to blame everything on our leaders. It's not only a leadership problem, though. Even the best leader would struggle with the fact that apparently Americans are very unwilling to deal with a little bit of hardship. Now, this didn't used to be true. My parents were born in the Great Depression, so I had very old parents when I was born. They were already in their 40s when I was born, and I'm older. So they were born in very hard times. And then they went through World War II. That generation was very willing to put up with hardship because they were used to it. But the people since then, and even now several generations in, have not seen real hardship. They haven't seen people dying. They haven't seen a lot of people getting shot in wars. They haven't been bombed. Their idea of hardship is, oh, hey, I'm out of a job for a while, which is a hardship, but it's not like being bombed. It's not like starving. So that is, I've written notes on this. And I say Americans seem to have forgotten that unpleasant things can be a part of life. We've been rich for so long that we are reacting to the simplest hardships like spoiled children. Note that COVID has produced many real hardships, and I'm not discounting them. People dying, people being out of work, etc. But from people calling their dogs emotional support animals only because they feel like bringing them on the plane or to the mall, to freaking out that a mask is an imposition of freedom or just too uncomfortable is unreasonable. Now, I get that I'm spoiled and privileged in my own ways. I'm not denying that. But we're still throwing tantrums. I'm happy to put on a mask. The last real pain we faced was in 1941 to 1945. Most people who remember it have died. Therefore, our culture is one of consumer wealth. So, America has handled this poorly, not only because of bad leaders. Somebody said we need contact tracing. You can't do contact tracing, unfortunately, on 46,000 cases. You have to get the case number down, then you can do it. But what have we learned from this? So I want to transition to, we've handled it like shit. Now what? 9/11 was not real pain, Evan. This is a good point. 9/11 was 2,000 people and a couple of buildings and some people being scared. But on the real scope, to give you a comparison, World War II was 500,000 American casualties. 500,000. So it's not that 9/11 wasn't a tragedy or an attack, but it was not meaningful in the sense of real carnage. All right. And in fact, far more people have died from COVID. More than 50 times as many people have died from COVID as died from 9/11, if you want a reference. That's one way to look at it. More than 5 times as many New Yorkers. So, yeah, no problem. Okay. So let's talk about other governmental systems and get some comparisons. So one thing we can look at is centralized versus decentralized government. So, for example, China is very, very centralized. The EU that had those great results I showed is actually very decentralized. Yes, there is an EU government. But if you look, every country in the EU basically implemented their own policies, shut down their borders their own way, reopened in their own way, managed their lockdowns in their own way. So the US is decentralized, but the EU is also decentralized. So centralized versus decentralized is not enough only to define the difference. Because some people are saying like, oh yeah, China controlled the pandemic because they're a dictatorship and they could do things America couldn't. Well, that's true, but you can't say that of Europe. So we can learn some by studying how did centralized governments react, strong central governments, and how did decentralized democracies react. And how has that worked out for them? Authoritarian versus democratic. Or non-authoritarian. So China and Russia are both centralized authoritarian regimes, but they have had very different results because China took an immediate view of this is a threat to our state, and they reacted as a threatened state. Russia, as best I can tell, we may have some Russians here who can comment, Russia took a view led by Putin of, whatever. It's not too big of a threat to me as Putin. I won't act for a while. And so you see different pandemic results based on different models, even within authoritarian regimes. Europe, Australia, New Zealand, US, they're all democratic. So is India. You're getting tons of different results from those. Interestingly, right now, Europe doing well, Australia doing well, New Zealand doing well. Big difference, though. Europe was bad before it was good. Australia and New Zealand never got that bad. U.S. is a shit show, as we've discussed. Then you have India. India seems to be tracking slowly worse, but they're not as bad as possible yet. This is going to get better as the margarita goes. Okay, so we have centralized versus decentralized. Different countries handling it differently. We have authoritarian versus democratic. But now we need to talk about the culture of the citizens. And here I think the key element is trusting versus distrusting. And once we cover all this, we're now going to get to your workplace. But we're going to stick on COVID for a minute. So I've been to China 3 times. I have friends who live there. Generally, Chinese citizens are somewhat distrusting of their central government. They know about the Great Firewall of China. They know that the news they get is managed. They know that what is said to them is not always the full truth. So it isn't that you must trust your government. However, I would say from what I know, again, is that Swedish and New Zealand citizens tend to trust their government. Now, if we have a New Zealander here, they can fill me in. But Swedish citizens, we have Liger and some others who tell me that in Sweden, generally there's faith in the public institutions. It may not be total, but it's higher than in the U.S. So, and then with Americans, Americans at this point distrust the government to the level of conspiracy theory. Everything the government says, we only think it's some kind of lie, and we will come up with any explanation from aliens to nanobots to mind control rays, QAnon, yes, Domkang is right on, to explain why anything we don't like not only violates my rights, it's a deep state conspiracy theory by someone. If you're on the right politically, it's the deep state left. If you're on the left, it's the crazy right, it's alt-right. Somebody, not only are my rights being violated, 5G mind control. This shit is crazy. So, trust versus distrust is part of a culture. And some cultures are used to very strict rules versus some are used to very strong freedoms. So my canonical example here would be Singapore. Singapore is incredibly regulated. It is a democracy, but it's incredibly regulated. The same to some degree, I believe, although I'm not as familiar with the cultures, with South Korea and Taiwan. So you have countries that can be democracies, but with very strong regulation, which can make them look somewhat like authoritarian states. Thank you for the tier 1 sub gift, 40 pink dragons. Super nice of you. My moderation staff is always telling me I should ask for subs. I care enough about helping you that I never get around to it. Of course, I appreciate people who sub to the community and join. If you feel so moved, I would love it. We donate the results to a good cause, but you're always welcome to join the community, and I appreciate it very much. All right. So I can't go deep into every case. Here's my conclusion. The combination of elements that appears to have worked for COVID is either central authority, China, implementing a decisive plan, a clear plan, or trusting citizens with a clear plan. Sweden. Sweden is not perfect. Sweden is way more than Denmark and Norway and whatever, and they get criticized. However, Sweden is not a crazy blow up of cases like originally happened in Italy and Spain, like has now happened in the US and Brazil. Again, authoritarian won't get it done because Bolsonaro in Brazil is authoritarian, but he's not controlling it. Putin in Russia is authoritarian. He's not getting results. So what have we learned? Authoritarians with a plan can do it. Trusting citizens in a democracy and a plan can do it. In both cases, you need a plan, though. America's problem is essentially no plan, which is a leadership failure. However, I speculate, to close off this topic before I go into your careers and then take your questions, I speculate Self-reported trust attitudes. Banhammer put in an interesting link. We might repost it. I don't know what it is. It's also a trust problem. Yeah, I agree it's a trust problem. Because now it's reported like a third of Americans won't take a COVID virus when it's invented, or a COVID vaccine, when it's invented, because they fear like they'll be injected with microchips and shit. It's crazy. So what hasn't worked? Authoritarians with bad plans, Brazil, Russia, the U.S., and citizens with distrust, the U.S. All right. So I want to compare to entrepreneurialism, though. This is really interesting. It's often discussed. Most people know about the FANG stocks, which stands for Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. Sometimes Microsoft is thrown in there. They don't fit in the acronym. The point is, over the past 20, 30 years, despite being spoiled children, dispositionally, America has produced all, except for Tencent, arguably, all of the biggest, most successful new companies in that period. You look at Europe, who I just praised for their handling of the pandemic, they have produced none comparatively. Someone in chat will call me out and say, they'll say the phone maker guys or someone, but Europe has produced no brand new Nokia, thank you. I don't know why I was blocked on that. They've produced no super big companies in the tech era. And yeah, somebody's saying Nokia is big, but Nokia hasn't thrived. So again, you can talk about Germany, but where is the new company in Germany? Germany has many great companies. I'm not denying that. Spotify is not big. Spotify is nice. It is not on the order of the FANG companies. But look, I'm not going to argue that there is no entrepreneurship in Europe. I'm simply arguing proportion. It's just like the U.S. hasn't done completely, absolutely nothing to control COVID. We've just done far too little. When you go to entrepreneurship and tech invention, you have a big gap to Europe. Europe has not invented at the pace. So, what's the lesson here? Culture and leadership also has impacts in different dimensions. And the main thing I want you to take away is that a government and a culture that is well optimized for one thing, pandemic response, which Europe has done pretty well despite being a distributed democracy, is not necessarily as well optimized for another, entrepreneurship, tech inventorship. America, which has done a crappy job of COVID response, that same screw you, I'll do it my way, and I'm going to make money and don't get in my way, has done really well for entrepreneurship. So the lesson here, if you want to think about your workplace culture and your leaders, is that the culture you build as a leader and that your workplace exhibits puts boundaries on where its skills will be strong and weak. So a culture that is really good at one thing may be really poor at another. And a leadership style that's really good at one thing may not be as good at another. That's the point, and that's what COVID has demonstrated. Because COVID has demonstrated in this case that the European system works great, works better than the American system, works better than the Russian system, better than the Brazilian system for pandemic response. It is not working better for tech innovation and startups. So, yeah, Saltine says risk-taking is better incentivized in America. All right, so this leads to the question, what kind of culture in a workplace is good? If we apply this down to a workplace and you're a leader, sometimes Hephaestus is here, I saw Sean123 is here, I'm a leader, there are others. What kind of leadership style is best? Well, I don't know if I can say what is best. Here is my conclusion of what's pretty good. What you're looking for, I believe, is federated independence. So you're looking for a federation, and the key notions here are global direction on the vision or mission, but with local methods and decisions on how to achieve that mission. That appears to be a good balance. And here I am going to use an article I read. I'm not speaking for Amazon or from internal knowledge, but an article I read about how Amazon as a company is performing well. And they correctly pointed out that our culture is one that has a central leader, Bezos, who sets direction. But then leaders like me are given tremendous latitude for how to implement that direction in our local context. So the way I lead Twitch Prime may be different than the way someone leads the cutlery, the silverware category of retail sales, selling forks and spoons, may be very different from somehow the leader of AWS, say the EC2 service, sells server compute cycles. So, all right, I was reading chat real quick. The point is, and yeah, the H-1B stuff is a mess. We'll get into that later. That's a terrible decision. But I think that will get fixed. Okay, so the point I want you to take away is potentially a very good culture has someone who sets direction and can define a mission and be the visionary, and then people who have independence to go implement it. So Jobs, famous as a visionary, super demanding, but huge team working under him got it done. Bezos, visionary. Elon Musk at Tesla, visionary. For that matter, Larry and Sergey at Google, visionaries in their own way, more on the mathematical side, but visionaries. Zuckerberg, you can love him or hate him. Zuckerberg has a ton in it. And yes, Pentaquant, you're absolutely right. There is so much in your argument to untangle. You're right. Really properly developing this argument would take a whole book. Maybe I'll write it someday. It will be my pandemic book. But what I'm seeing is, and here's where potentially we can agree, ultimately the most valuable commodity you're shooting for in a business is to enable local good judgment. A key, I think, is true is that if everyone, whether in the COVID case in a country or in the business case working at a company, had both excellent judgment and the same information, you would not actually need either leaders or culture. Where you need leaders and culture is because not everyone has developed excellent judgment, and not everyone has the same access to information. So a leader's job is to share information and to set a goal that everyone in a particular group is going to work towards. Because not everyone, including me, including you, and yeah, Taleb is a very interesting author. I've gotten a lot more I've started reading or listening to on Audible, Anti-Fragile. And Taleb has a lot of good points about distributed judgment and basically the problem of large systems. So if you're looking for something to read, it's a pretty good book. And Taleb seems to be very smart. I haven't finished enough of it to be sure, but I definitely find his ideas challenging. The point is, leaders set the direction, and then the cultural rules guide individuals about, okay, the leader has set a goal. How are we going to collaborate and achieve those goals? Now, if you're in an authoritarian system, your culture may be, well, we obey the leader because if we don't, we get shot or put in a camp or disappeared. And if you're in a democracy like what I'm told Sweden is like, you may follow the culture, maybe follow the leadership because we generally trust our institutions and they give us good advice. And so we act in that way. And I want to be careful generalizing too much, But in some countries, there is the thought of respect for authority. So when the leader says something, it's not that you're required by law to do what they say, but it's a matter of respect, and it's a matter of deference. And so the leader can lead without making it a law or a rule, because people will say, well, that is what our leaders decided, and so I'm going to trust in them. The point is, your culture influences how the people collaborate and react to direction. So what I'm trying to convey is you can look around your workplace, even if you're not a leader, and say, okay, how do people respond? When the leader says something, do you have a conspiracy theory culture? So if you're a leader, if your manager holds an all hands or a stand up or a morning coffee chat or whatever you call it, does everyone walk away going, that guy, he's so full of shit? Then you have a skeptical conspiracy theory culture. On the other hand, if they walk away and say, oh, wow, that was good information, I better figure out, how are we going to do that? Then you have a different culture. So you can figure out how your culture fits in this same scale. Similarly, do you work at a place where anybody who disagrees gets fired? Right? Then you're working in an authoritarian workplace. Do you live in a workplace where no decisions get made until most or all people agree? Which, by the way, is what I experienced within Twitch. Not within Twitch Prime where I work today, but when I worked at Twitch in the past, Twitch was very consensus driven, and it would delay decisions until everyone or almost everyone agreed. So in that consensus driven is a different type of culture. It made the company slower, in my opinion, but also more bought in, and it was just a different way of doing things. So the end point here is, for leaders, you not only need to think about your leadership style, but how are you setting up and building the culture of the organization? There's a saying in a training class. I actually have a slide for it. It's a quote, but it says, what you are doing speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. And I think it's from Thoreau. It might be from Emerson. Anyway. All right, so we're done. That's enough. I haven't taken questions. I'll hop over and see if you've put any questions in. We have lots of people here. I can take questions on leadership. There's a couple unapproved questions. We'll get those approved and voted on. Yeah. So mods, you're falling down on the job. I'll get in trouble for that. Oh, I'm told they're not appropriate. All right. So the mods are holding questions we don't want to answer because they're not off top. They're off topic. So we don't have any on-topic questions. If you want to ask on-topic questions, we'll do those. Then we'll consider the off-topic questions. And otherwise, I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this. But let's talk. What do you think about COVID pandemic and leadership worldwide? I am super fascinated by this topic. I've tried to keep up with chat, but I would be happy to read chat and learn more about your country and your experiences. And whether or not you're willing to get on an airplane. Who's willing to fly on an airplane right now? So there's an interesting question that hasn't gone into our question tool, but I like it. Do you believe you've had a change in perspective of stick it to the man versus becoming a leader yourself? So I've been a leader most of my career. I probably had a little bit of stick it to the man back in college. Where I was a difficult employee in like a college setting, but colleges encourage so much rebellion. Like everybody's free and you can express any opinion and there are no bad opinions and blah, blah, blah. Dad opinion. That's a good staff handle. So I don't think I was ever really stick it to the man. And it's funny because I have a deep skepticism of authority when I don't trust the figures in authority. So I have had trouble sometimes with the idea of police or military authority, skepticism of those. All right. So it looks like people want to talk about other stuff. So mods, I don't see any question here that's flat out inappropriate. Let's just run them. Let people vote on them. Approve them all. Let's see what people want to talk about. Tim's Eye says, what do you think about the U.S.-China relationship? Oh, my God. So some of you know my daughter is adopted from China. I've been to China multiple times. I think the relationship is a mess. I think it's true that previous presidents allowed China to exploit America in trade relationships. I think one of the few things Trump did that was not completely insane, my opinion, was to challenge that unequal trade relationship. And then I think he made a hash of it after that, because he got into more what was to his political advantage than what was actually right or wrong. I think if he had simply stood up for a different trade relationship, he could have gotten a more equitable trade relationship, but he had to bring in personal political gain into it, my opinion. So I think the relationship is a mess, and China is laughing all the way to the pandemic bank now. That's my opinion. So, and I love how my mods are always on it. When I say it's my opinion, they come right out and say, and I don't represent Amazon or Twitch. All right. So we have a few questions with a few votes, but there's 90 of you here, and no question has more than 2 votes. So last call for votes, and then I'll start answering questions in our tool. It says, we steal IP from the British Empire. I don't know if we've done that anytime. Well, I don't know anything about that. Yeah, look, countries conduct espionage. It's just true. Okay, let's jump on it. We have enough things with votes now. Thank you. Keep voting. There's tons of you, and nothing has more than 4 votes. You can always use bits, and the guy who built the widget, you know, for like $5 or even $3, you can totally drive any question, or even $1, I think. You can drive any question you want to be the top question. Little known fact. It's not about me getting bits. It's about giving you power. All right. Because, yeah, capitalism. Money equals power. Okay. First question is, if you're dealing with team members that are used to a lot of micromanagement, or a manager showing people how to do things, how do you encourage them to start thinking independently? So you're going to have to, fast changes freak people out. The first thing I would do anytime I wanted to make a change, first read the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath if you want more detail. But I will answer your question anyway. Awesome. What's that about? Sorry, I have to acknowledge this. 25 tier 1 subs. That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you very much. That's and I got it. I was one of the emote getters. What a surprise. Market gains. Yes. You know, I will finish answering this question in a second. I have to comment. I read today that the U.S. stock market is up by a higher percentage this quarter than in like any time in recent memory, which is ridiculous. But it went down in the end of the last quarter because of COVID, and then it bounced back. And so it's up some ridiculous, since 1998. That's crazy. I do believe that the pandemic problems are going to come back to haunt us economically. But the growth in the U.S. stock market is crazy. It's up 20%. So Pentaquant, you must be laughing all the way to the investment bank also. Hot soup. I didn't know you were here. Welcome. We have a lot of staff tonight. That's nice. Staff like Banhammer normally lurk silently because they don't want to overpower the chat. All right, so back to this question. But I love the fact that staff is here. And that keeps me honest when I say I don't speak for Twitch. So back to the question. The first thing I would do, which comes from the book Switch, is I would tell people what I'm going to do. So I would say, you've been used to a lot of instruction. I want to encourage you to try to solve things yourself. So I'm not going to tell you how to do things as much. If you need help, you can ask me. And then you slowly back off. But you have to repeat that message a lot. It's amazing. Yes, one up. You don't want to overpower the chat. It's good though. Because you're still working. So Banhammer, he's based on the East Coast, so it's 9 o'clock. But he has a lot to do. Banhammer is Twitch BI, Twitch data science, and yeah. And really, we haven't thanked Awesome enough. Awesome also helps me construct the shows. I've been trying to help Awesome find a mentor. So he's a very generous sponsor of the channel, and a dashing young man to go with it. Okay. Plus, his real legal name is Awesome, and here he is living up to it. It's not just a handle. So this is a good thing. We'll give him advice. Awesome has asked me, and I am of two minds about this. On a resume, does having the name Awesome Patel help him or hurt him? Should he go with A. Patel on a resume, or with his full legal name, Awesome Patel? He doesn't have a middle name. Yeah, so Renee says it stands out. Pentaquant says it stands out, essentially. Use your full name. This is different than some advice he's gotten. I think this is really hard. All right. So I'm not doing a good job at finishing answering this question. The point is, you've got to lead people through several cycles to change their mindset. You can't just drop on them one day. I know you're used to being told how to do everything, but now suddenly you're independent. It's a culture shift. And that's what the book Switch is about. It's about how to switch direction. And you're going to have to do it in steps because people resist change. If you just think about yourself even, none of us loves change that we're not controlling. When changes are being injected into our lives, we rebel against them, we fight, we push back, we want the old way. If you change our diet, we want our pizza rolls. If you change our taxes up or down, we complain. If you change where we live, how we work, how we commute, any of it, we tend to fight it unless it's obviously way better. This type of work will be scary. So, all right. You've got to lead people. And then you praise the ones who succeed and you showcase them. You say, see here, Bob solved this problem on his own. Good job, Bob. That's all it takes. But in the team meeting or whatever, you acknowledge people who start solving things. The other thing you must do, if you ask people to start thinking on their own and then you get mad at them and yell at them when something goes wrong, they will never think on their own again. Instead, you have to say, Bob, unfortunately, that didn't work out, but I appreciate that you tried. Great job, Bob. We'll do better next time. If you say that, Bob will try again. If you say, Bob, dude, when I said think for yourself, I did not mean what you did. That was a terrible idea. Please don't do that. Bob will never try anything on his own again. You have to encourage and you have to reward failure as learning, not punish failure as cost. And Bob for the win. That's right. Sometimes I use Fred. I try to use generic names that aren't John Doe. All right. Dad opinion. What is ADCAR? Spell it out. I better answer questions fast. The margarita's almost gone. Let's go to the next question. Teach, not punish. Renee, that is completely right. All right. The COVID situation is unique, where the scientific consensus swayed so much over time. As a leader, how do you make solid decisions when your data source is changing by the day so dramatically? Yeah, this is a good point. We want to venerate science, and I'm a scientist effectively. My parents were scientists. But this is a case where the science has not been at all perfect. There was the question in the beginning, people forget this. The first news out of China was it wasn't clear it spread human to human. Then there's the question of how much spreads by aerosol. And are there silent spreaders? How many people are asymptomatic? Do masks help? Do masks help you, or do they only protect other people from you? This is what made this decision really sporting. is there was no obvious complete right and wrong in the beginning. How much shutdown do we need to do? Are outdoor activities safe? So the question here, you cannot make solid decisions when the data source is changing. What you need to do is make the best decision you can for now. And you have to be public about that and say, look, we're going to make the best decision we can and we will update it. So something Bezos says, which I think is right, in America, and I think in a lot of the world, people who change their minds are criticized for flip-flopping, for being inconsistent. And his point is, and I agree with him, when you get new data, if you don't reevaluate your perspective and see, does this data mean I need to change my plan, you're not thinking clearly. Like you're not actually, sometimes changing your mind in the presence of new data is obviously the right thing to do. And so having a pressure of like, damn it, I committed to this plan and we're sticking to it. If the data changes, you change your plan. So I think what leaders could have done is make the best decision they can, but communicate this is an evolving situation and we will update our guidance in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks. If you're clear that an update is coming, this goes to the previous question. It's like managing people. If you're clear that the guidance is for 4 weeks and will be reevaluated, you can update it and no one will think it's weird. But if you're like, damn it, this is the way, then you get cornered and stuck. All right. So, in the presence of ambiguous data, you tend to make conservative decisions and you try really hard to get more data fast, right? You try to make the best decision you can. You try to gather the resources to be agile so that you can change directions. And you try to get more data as fast as you can. You test. And so actually, this is a great leadership question. How do you handle any ambiguous situation? You realize that you're going to have to adapt as you learn, and you set out to learn in the safest, fastest way possible. Now, that guidance is generic because every situation differs, but anybody can be a good leader in the presence of completely incontrovertible facts. All of us believe that if I take a brick and I hold it over my foot and I let go, it's going to fall on my foot and hurt. So what a surprise. Not very many people do that because pretty much the dumbest person or the least thoughtful still knows that if I drop a brick on my foot, it is going to fall and it is going to hurt. So leadership actually becomes a fun sport in the presence of uncertain, unclear outcomes. So then it's a question of how you do that well. And in a situation like this, where the data was so flexible, it's very, very hard. And you have to be transparent about that. So we talked about trust. Leaders maintain trust by being clear. All right. Next question. It's somewhat political. We'll try and I've talked a little bit of politics, but we normally avoid that. But we'll see if we can make use out of this question. The question says, assume that Trump is not reelected. Would the next president have a shot at healing the country at all, or have we gone too far? So I don't think this needs to be a political answer. We can remove Trump from it. You can just ask this question. How much change has this president or any previous president created in 4 years? The next president can undo an equal amount in 4 years, roughly. What's a little harder is to change relationships with other countries, but even those can be changed. So we have differing relationships with Russia or China or the EU than we did. again, with 4 years, we can change those back. You cannot do it in 1 month. You cannot do it in 6 months. But with 4 or 8 years, most of it can be changed. For better or for worse, our country is flexible on a multi-year scale. That said, so no, we're not too far gone. And I actually had we're going to talk COVID again for 1 second. I was having a discussion with some people. It would be terrible for individuals. And so I don't want this. However, there is an argument that the best thing for America, long-term, culturally, because of us being spoiled, would be lots of death, lots of unemployment, and enough pain to change our culture to one that is focused on something other than self-centered consumerism. So, am I willing to see 1 million people die to get that? Not really. But I can acknowledge that if 1 million people die anyway, we may get a very good side effect from that high cost of culture change to be less self-centered and less self-serving than we are today. So you want to talk about changing and leading. There is a saying in leadership that says never waste a good crisis. Right now we're wasting a good crisis. And we don't want to do that. And Renee is attempting to protect me from my statements being viewed as anything but my own. There you go. Thank you, Renee. So countries get stronger through adversity, just like people do. I don't really want 1 million people in America to die from this pandemic to make us stronger. But if that happens anyway, it will make our culture more realistic, less self-centered, and happier to simply be healthy and less concerned with its rights than we are today. Because we haven't had any hardship, right? We're fat, dumb, and happy. All right. This next question is internal to Amazon. What's the most important trait or characteristic you look for in a software development manager going from level 6 to level 7? I can translate this to regular people English outside of Amazon, which is what's the most important trait I look for in someone going from a first level manager to a manager of managers? And the answer is judgment. I look for their ability to think independently, handle ambiguous situations like we've just been talking about, move quickly and with confidence, but adjust their direction. So it's about judgment. The number one thing I try to teach people, same thing I'm trying to do here all the time in this channel, is teach you to make better decisions. It's why I'm always talking about the book Decisive, also by Chip and Dan Heath. So the answer to this question is the most difficult thing is wisdom and judgment. It's why wisdom in history is normally associated with old age, because it's very hard to inject it early in someone's life. They tend to accumulate it through experience. And so if you want to accelerate that, you're trying to figure out how to get good judgment when you're younger. And that's can only be done if you're willing and if you undertake a humble process of learning from others, which we'll go to our next question. Because the next question talks about those who are arrogant and cocky. How do you shrug off an arrogant and cocky reputation? Maybe it's because I'm young, but I am very about sticking it to the man. So I was arrogant and cocky as well. One way you shrug it off is fail. Fail publicly. That'll do it. So go take some risks. Go state loudly how you're going to succeed. And when you fall on your face a few times, that will help. I used to say, well, people call me a loose cannon, but that's only when I'm pointed against them or pointed at them. So the way to shrug off the reputation of being arrogant and cocky, I guess, would be to be right all the time. But remember, you can be right without being abrasive. You can be humble. So Being right and being cocky are different. You don't have to be a jerk about what you know. You can be humble about it. You can suggest things, but you say you get joy from sticking it to the man. My question for you would be, what has been wrong in your childhood or life that you need that pleasure? What is it about your own ego that needs to be fed by being publicly right against authority? That, because there is something. Why? Who beat you? Who held you down? Who was dumb around you but had power? The point is, something in your history created this need in you to stick it to the man, in your words. Find out what that is and decide if you're willing to be controlled by it. Because if you, quote unquote, can't help sticking it to the man, then you're not really in charge. Something inside you, something psychological, is driving you to that behavior. And are you really in control of yourself if you must do it? This goes exactly back to what I said about wearing masks last week, and I implied this week. A truly free person, man or woman, who is confident in his or her freedom can put on a mask even if they personally believe that masks are worthless and uncomfortable and do nothing for disease, because it's no big deal. They can say, you know what, I don't agree with this. I don't think it's going to make that much safety, but it's cool. It's important to you. It's not a huge deal. A mask is a minor inconvenience. It makes you feel better. No big deal. Because it's not an essential freedom that they need to grandstand on. But the person who's not secure in their freedom must fight it and say, you won't control me. Same thing here. The arrogant person, their self-worth is tied up in being publicly right. The confident person has no problem being publicly wrong because they're humble and can say, I am so sorry. You are correct. I was mistaken. Thank you. You've shown me a better way. They don't have any issue with it. The cocky person is wounded. So look inside yourself, and that's how you would shrug it off. All right. I'm getting my doctorate from chat tonight. Thank you. All right, here we go. A couple more questions. How do you push software adoption in a small organization where they're still using Excel for the task, people, process management? Show them a better way. Anytime you're trying to get adoption, again, tonight a lot of people are asking questions because it's about culture and change. Read this book, Switch, by Chip and Dan Heath. It's super informative. It's full of fun stories. It's really easy to read. You have to show them what's in it for them. And you have to show them it would be easy and show them the path. You can't come at it and say, well, you're doing this wrong. You have to say, hey, would you be interested in seeing another way? Is there anyone here who would try this different way with me? I will help you. And you get one person who's willing to step up and try something, and then you make them an example of success. So that's how you do it. So I'm speeding up because it's speed run time and the drink is gone. So someone else just asked essentially the same question. How do you drive software adoption in a small organization where they're still using .xls? Same question submitted twice. Thank you. Same answer. Read Switch. Incredible book. As a leader, how do you mold your team's culture to be different from that of a larger company? Wow. That's like a whole show and more. Look, it's easier in a small company, right? I guess you want to mold your team within a larger company. So you have to quickly understand what you can control and what you cannot. So in a smaller company, in a large company, like I can control what hours my team works or how they use email or what tools we have. I cannot control our healthcare policy. So the first thing you have to understand is how much differentiation you can have. The second thing is you cannot differentiate when you touch other teams because they may still use that culture. But within your team, it's a matter of communicating, leading by example, and setting norms. What you communicate, exemplify, and reward will be what you get. So what you show, what you do, and what you reward will be what you get. So if you want a different culture, reward different things. Humans are status-seeking monkeys. It's a derogatory summary, but it's super accurate. If you give status, if you give rewards and prominence for different behavior than the overall company, you'll get different results. All right. Next question goes all the way back to COVID. Is South Korea a counterexample, decent culture of entrepreneurship, but also a great COVID response, including innovation and COVID response, drive-through testing, fast, accurate tests? Yeah, South Korea is an excellent example generally. Are they a counterexample? They're a very unique culture. A small country, highly centralized, democratic, innovative. The question I would have, and I don't have the expertise to answer this difference between South Korea and Europe, is for Europe, I don't know how much different laws and traditions are different in South Korea. South Korea has risen to prominence much more recently than Europe. I don't have a good comparison of the level of socialism, the level of institutions. I don't know enough to answer that question. I will say South Korea seems to combine trust in central power with successful entrepreneurship. You could argue the same thing of Japan. South Korea and Japan, potentially Taiwan. Again, I don't have enough knowledge. I'm sorry. All right, we're going to answer a couple more. How do you as a leader / manager that has minimal focus and leads the team, and how do you deal with a leader or manager who has minimal focus and leads the team in many chaotic directions? And there's a question in chat too. How does one reward humility and vulnerability? Well, you praise it and you exhibit it. And you defend people. If someone attacks them or criticizes them for showing vulnerability, you have to step in and defend them. All right. So questions got out of order here. That's okay. The one with the most votes now is, how can new hires show leadership quickly? Take a project, own it, deliver it. If you're a new hire, ask for what needs to be done, then do that thing. Contribute right away. New hires, there's a book called The First 90 Days. It's a good book. It's not on my book list right now. I've heard good things about it. But basically, the way you show leadership is pitch in right away. You don't need to show leadership day one, by the way. Simply show that you're competent and you're there to help, and then find something to lead. I often say results are the currency of credibility. Before I sought to lead, I would seek to deliver some value. Just do something useful and valuable. Then you can lead. So most people, remember, it's a sad world. Most people don't do very much. They don't do very much that's, they try to hide from work. You can show quote unquote leadership just by putting in an honest day's hard work and trying to ask around about what needs to be done and then doing it. Most people don't bother. They're there trying to figure out how to take as many smoke breaks, vape breaks, coffee breaks, donut breaks, bathroom breaks as they can. Just do a little work. Don't be on Facebook all day. Listen to me on Twitch only at night. Now we'll go to, how do you deal with a leader or manager that has minimal focus and leads the team in many chaotic directions? Well, you may need to change teams, but another option is pick one of his or her many directions and stick to it. Try to knock things off. Basically, if the manager tends to change direction from A to B and then back to A, just stay on A until A is done and then go to B. However, this is a very bad situation. You can also try to talk to the manager and just say, hey, Like the manager may not realize it, and you can say, hey, you asked me to do thing A, now you're asking for B. Does that mean A is no longer important? Or what's up? Which one of A or B do you want? So you can also ask. But there's a blog I always talk about. It's a guy named Brad Porter, who's a distinguished engineer at Amazon, and he wrote an article called Selective Negligence. This is essentially my answer to this question. Do you think productivity tracking software being used on remote employees is effective? I have no idea. I hope not. I think most people at most companies want to do well, and if you give them good incentives and treat them well, they'll work hard, and you don't need to micromanage them. So I hope it's not effective. I'm sure with ML and cameras and tracking everything, we can eventually get really smart about this, like a scary sort of Brave New World kind of future, but I don't want to see it. So I think this stuff actually needs to be regulated. Not because I think employees should be free to F off at home, but because where it leads is really scary, like subliminal advertising and just too much mind control in your home. So, okay. The $1 million question is there any way up buffering? So this happens once an hour. I don't know why. Thank you, Comcast. But I should be back now. All right. The $1 million question, is there any way for the U.S. to be less self-centered without the mass carnage, or is the process too slow? So this is a bigger question than just the U.S. You see it all over the world, right? The kids of rich people generally are lazy. Why is that? The grandkids of rich people generally are really lazy. They use drugs, they kill themselves, whatever. Why is that? Why is it that the human animal self-destructs if not challenged? I don't have an answer to that. It's, we should go get Dr. K for that one. But the U.S., I don't think is really different than any other human, except that we're anti-fragile in the Talib sense, that we're all over the place. All right, so we're down to questions with only one vote. The last question I want to answer is, let's see, does your COVID entrepreneurship hypothesis rest on the claim that the U.S. COVID response would have been bad under any federal government, not just the particular one we had now? It is my opinion that a different president would have done better, but not as well as other countries. Because what I've learned is Americans would have opposed long-term restrictions in the name of freedom. Now, I think a very charismatic leader could have swayed that and done much better. But I think that what we're seeing with the distrust of vaccines in the U.S., with the willingness to have lawsuits over business closures, I think no president in living memory could have done a great job. Could we have stayed on par maybe with Europe? Maybe. I do not, as much as I personally am not a fan of our current president, I think this behavior has revealed flaws or challenges in our culture also. So that's my opinion. I think a strong centralized federal government response, competently led at the agency level, with a strong leader, charismatically inspiring, could have done very well. But he or she would have drawn tremendous opposition, and we still would not have done as well as, say, in New Zealand. In my opinion. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but, that's because I'm confident, arrogant, and cocky, like the earlier question. And with that, our last question is, which is the best tequila for me? anything except cheap Cuervo. Now, I don't remember what brand of tequila this was. It was a gift from one of my team members. Good team member. I do tequila shots with that team. When they achieve certain business goals, they enjoy it. And so, but anything but Cuervo, usually. I generally drink Patron. So I'm going to, I know the real Jessica asked, oh, here we go. My faithful squad has brought me the bottle. So tonight's tequila was Espolón. So Renee, do you know this one? I like Patron as a brand. There's other good ones. No, it's cool, Jessica. I'll ask yours. I'll answer your last question. Even though we did tequila. How do you deal with a new leader who is trying to force a culture of micromanagement? So you're used to being independent. Now we have a micromanager. I would not challenge them in public. I would go talk to them in private and see if they could believe that you know how to, if they are willing to trust, or if they'd like to hear what you're good at. I have not had a ton of different tequilas, and I generally drink them in mixed drinks. So any good tequila works because I'm mixing it with sweet stuff because I have a sweet tooth. So Jessica, maybe ask me another time. I'll have to think more about that. But my usual answers are try to earn trust. Try to talk to them where they're not humiliated in private. Ask them what would allow them to give you more flexibility. And then if none of that works, change teams. Remember, your life, I'll close on this. This is your takeaway clip for the night. Your life is too short to be wasted working for a bad manager. If you try to do the right things and your manager won't change, get the hell out. That's like, even though I like to retain my people, if working for me is living hell for you, leave. Okay, and with that, I will be back next week. I'm going to do a special show on the ultimate version of the magic loop, which is probably the main thing we teach here. I'm going to try and do the canonical reference video live. So come back for that. I will see you next Tuesday. Thank you, by the way, once again, Awesome, for the huge gifted subs. Thank you to all the Twitch staff like Hot Soup and others who are here. And with that, I hope to see you all again soon. Stay safe, don't catch COVID, and good night.